everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Gurrs, and Purrs. My name's Leslie, and today is going to be part 2 of my book chat where I discuss literary work by Hanif Abdurraqib. We're going to discuss first Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest. I'm going to say this, I always end up doing this at the beginning of my videos. I love this book. I loved the 3 that I did read. One of them is a reread, but I'll get to that. This really is a love letter to a tribe called Quest, and what the author does, he does discuss the band and their history, but he goes deeper to add context. And so Abdurraqib always writes like an essay form and always inserts themselves into the narrative, which I really enjoy because it's not just providing context. What he's doing is he's adding the impact as a fan, and I really love that. There are some sections where the author is writing directly to the bandmates as a fan and he discusses things like all the qualities that he loves about them, but also apologizes as a fan, you know, as sometimes as a fan of something you might like have critiques, but now that he's older he feels different about maybe what he thought before. I'm trying to be vague so that you'll have that experience of specificity like when you read the book. And this actually starts out talking about the origins of jazz, how it came from a place of celebration and protest and survival. And I want to talk about the beginning because the author talks about the origins or beginning of jazz, but then also talks about the first time he really like acknowledged or understood microaggressions from an early age. And there's one other thing, I feel like it was like 3 things that he did. Oh, and also, and when he first fell in love with the band. So I feel like the beginning are formatted with those 3 elements in mind, and that kind of swirls throughout the book. He also talks about the birth of hip-hop, which leads to a conversation about NWA, and I appreciated what he talked about because I think I was like too young, but he writes about how they had album burnings going on, like kind of like book burnings but with albums. And book burning has been around for a long time, but this is the first time I've ever heard about like an album being burned. And I think that really speaks to censorship. And I just felt like that really stuck out to me. Later on, when the author goes on to talk about the birth of hip-hop, he talks about all these different people that contributed, but I appreciated that he brought up Queen Latifah because he makes reference to Queen Latifah being in Living Single, or Living Single. I always call it in Living Single, I don't know why, but I just remember watching that when I was really little. And Khadijah, who Queen Latifah plays, wasn't necessarily like my favorite character, but Maxine was my favorite character, and I'm pretty sure she was like a lawyer in the show. It's been a while, but just reading certain parts of this book just really took me down memory lane. And that's something that the author does really well in like all his books. He's always making references in the past, because he's talking about specific time periods to discuss music or what was going on in pop culture. And so with his books you get this like sense of nostalgia, and I really enjoyed that. That was like a plus for me that he started talking about that. The author goes on to talk about the pressures of success. So when A Tribe Called Quest was really young, they just blew up really quickly. And I thought, and it was an interesting point that the author made, that the band crafted their own sound. They did their own thing. But once they have success, there's this pressure, and it's not from other artists necessarily, or maybe that's not the focus. What really stood out for me was that he's pointing out how it's the non-artists, the people that they're in business in, that put pressure on them and try to tell them what not to do or what will work, which is crazy because I've heard or read about stories like that time and time again, where it's like it's the own artist's unique vision that gets them to where they get to, but I almost feel like it's corporate greed that then tries to control that, right? And tell them, oh, this is what you need to do, when they don't even know what they're doing in the first place. So I thought that was interesting, and I appreciated that the author added that in. And I can't imagine how they managed all that stuff. And I don't want to mess up, but I could have sworn he was saying Q-tip. I don't want to get confused between each person, but how Q-tip had to learn how to translate between the engineers and all the other artists in the band to get the sound that they wanted, until Q-tip learned the engineering himself. And I thought that was really cool to learn how someone is so instrumental in crafting a sound, but then there has to be a translation of how that is developed. And I don't know anything about that, so I found that really interesting. The author also goes on to talk about like the family dynamics and the ebb and flow of the band's success and relationships within the band, and talks about the documentary that was done about them, which I still haven't seen. I hope I get to watch it before I make the wrap-up video. And how, in a way, something that the author always threads through is how who the people are versus perception. And I always enjoy those conversations, especially since time has passed. There's time to like reflect more on what the band has accomplished and their dynamics as people. All right, and last but not least, there's so much to cover in this. The author points out throughout the book that the band has always been politically charged, and no matter how small or big they are, that they will always be political, and they will always be willing to make those kind of sacrifices or say what they want to say at the Grammys. As where other artists, as they become bigger, there's more of this element to like be careful about what you're gonna say. He doesn't say this, but I'm assuming it's because maybe he's alluding to like all the money that's involved. At least that's what I was thinking about when I read this book, and just how valuable that is, and how now these members of the band are seen as elders that other artists can go to and receive guidance from. So yeah, I really enjoy this book. I love how along the way of talking about where the band started, we're also learning like the origins of the music, what was going on at the time around each album, just socially what was going on in America and the world, and how that informed the band's music. And so I really enjoyed it. I'd say pick it up, as I would say pick up any of his books. All right, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to talk about next. Okay, so I read If They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. I want to say it was last year. or the year before. It was pretty close, and it was the first book that I've ever read by this author. I just picked it off the shelf because I liked the way the cover looked, and I don't know anything about music criticism, so I thought maybe it was about that, because it does say in the bio that the author is a music critic. And I got so much more, and that really set the tone for my love for the author. So that was perfect timing, because right after I read it, the 5-year edition came out, and so I ended up picking up that too. I just like ran my tush to my local bookstore and picked up a copy. I love this. I love the color yellow, and it's from a very small independent publisher, $2 Radio, and so now I follow their Instagram. All right, I'm sorry, I had to take care of something really quick. Since this is a reread, I'm just going to summarize briefly, since I've talked about it before, and then talk about the additional material. I'm reading off my notes because I don't want to miss anything. Abdurraqib uses music as a vehicle to discuss intended audience for songs, sexual content in songs, found family, love, American racism, and how the author is treated in predominantly white music spaces. Each section of the essay collection opens up with a poem which sets a tone for the material the reader is going to delve into. The anniversary edition has 3 additional essays and an afterword by Jason Reynolds. The author extends his musical and social conversations by including praise of Whitney Houston's How Will I Know, Julie Baker's Hurt Less, and Carly Rae Jepsen's album Emotion, of all which are slightly optimistic additions in search of respite from the world we live in. And so, of all the essays I enjoyed in addition, I think the how do I say this? The essay about Carly Rae Jepsen really stood out to me, and I'm not a big fan of their music, but the author really makes you appreciate the artist's work, which he does for every artist he talks about. He just makes you listen to elements, or for instance with this artist, really understand their talent to engage with an audience. And the thing is, what the author does so well is, although he is talking about music and an artist, he's also talking about what's going on at that time. And I don't know where to start, because there's always someone being brutalized and murdered, and for this particular time, the author drives up north to Canada, and it's a moment of, I think, respite, to just have a moment with himself, and to just embrace all the beautiful feelings and emotions that come with a yearning of Carly Rae Jepsen's music. But even then, it's only a space that the author writes, that he could only stay in that space for so long before traveling back home. What does that mean? What do you think about someone that is leaving their country for just a moment to feel something else? So there's just a lot to chew on in all his essays, and he's definitely a writer that I'm just gonna always follow and admire, and wonder how he does it, because he threads all these different points, I guess you could say, and it still serves whatever the thesis is of the essay he's writing really well. I mean, they're just elements that you wouldn't necessarily, or I'll say I wouldn't necessarily know to kind of craft and put together, and as a reader, I'm just loving how he does that. And yeah, so I'll discuss that in the next book. All right, the last book that I read by Hanif Abdurraqib is In Praise of Black Performance, A Little Devil in America. I don't know if you could tell, but I have so many notes. I don't want to make this too long, so I'm going to try to keep it tight, not say too much. After reading all his other work, I felt like all his other work was what this culminates in. And so, as it says in the title, that it's a praise of Black performance, it's not just a performance of what we see on the cover, which is dance. It could be music. It goes beyond entertainment, and delves into how someone moves throughout spaces in their life, and also how those are perceived, although the perception isn't so much in every single essay, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So usually I have my notes written nicely, but they're like all over the place. I wanted to give an example. So for instance, before each section, and there's like 4 or 5 movements in this book, which I think is a reference to dance, but I don't know anything about dance, so bear with me. So yeah, before each section, the author writes a very short 1 or 2 page, sorry, it's my phone, story about himself. So the first one will be him being a little kid and trying to dance to get the attention of someone. Or later on you'll read about the author being in a barber shop and trying to navigate a situation while he's getting a haircut, and how that could be or require a level of performance. In other words, kind of like how you have a conversation with someone and they might bring up something political, and let's say they say something where they're kind of saying like one group isn't equal to another one, like alluding to that. And it's sometimes when you're in a vulnerable spot, you kind of have to think about which battle you're gonna pick. Or maybe you'll feel like, oh, I failed in that moment because I didn't handle it the way that I wanted to, or maybe I didn't speak up in the way that I wanted to. So he talks about those moments as an act of performance. And so he's really trying to delve into all the different elements of performance, as well as, like he says in the title, praising people that perform, specifically Black artists. So there'll be a dancer or a magician, someone that performs magic tricks, and the choices that they made throughout their life for who they were going to perform for. And he goes on to talk about Soul Train, which I really enjoyed, and also talks about the life and death of Don Cornelius, which I knew nothing about, so I really enjoyed that as well. The author has a section where he talks about the life of Josephine Baker and how she was a spy for the French, which I didn't know a lot about. So that was a really interesting essay to read about. And also there's one essay that I wanted to use as an example where the author brings all these different elements and yet somehow it works. So I want to say it was like in the second movement, the 5th essay. This is what the author includes. He talks about astrology, which links him to talk about the moon. And then he goes on to talk to his mom as a planet, which leads to him talking about Star Wars, which leads him to talk about Lando Calrissian, who's in Star Wars. I can't think of the actor's name, but he goes on to talk about the actor. And then he talks about the lack of Black people in sci-fi narratives, which then connects to him writing about Afrofuturism, which also leads him talking about Trayvon Martin and the NASA astronaut, which I just wrote down his name and I wrote it sloppy. Michael, you know what, I'm going to write it down below. That's what I'll do. And that leads him to talk about Octavia Butler. And somehow that leads him to talk about Sun Ra and his music and his life and what he thinks. And that was all in one essay. And it works beautifully. Everything connects. And is still talking about, yes, performances, but there's a culmination of that and a point that he's trying to make that all connects and all makes sense. And that's only something that this author can do because he does such an incredible job. All right, I'm looking at my notes, but I see that my battery is running out on my camera. I'll just say that he goes on to talk about the life of a backup singer and also the death of a fan whose name is Meredith something. I'm looking at my notes and they're terrible, so I'm probably just gonna stop here. But what the author was saying with that was how people perform, but specifically Black people, and how they're treated like as a invisible minority until suddenly the spotlight's on them. And I want to say they're used like in a way that they can't get out of. I'll just put it like that. I'm probably butchering it, but I like the conversation that he's having and how he uses an artist and a fan to make his point. And the names I will be including like below right here because I know I'm totally messing up. But yeah, this is another juggernaut of a book. And if you've ever read any of his other work, you could see how it's stamped all over in this. And also his love for Whitney Houston. I think Whitney Houston may be mentioned in every single work that he's written, which really is a testament to, for his love and admiration of Whitney Houston that I really enjoyed. So yeah, that's it for this book chat. I will still be doing my wrap up. I know it's already May, but I still really want to go through the author's work and talk about what I noticed as a thread. And I'm hoping to watch a couple of documentaries that the author mentioned in some of these books before I get to do the wrap up. So wish me luck. Thank you for watching. It really means a lot to me. Sometimes I look at videos while I'm editing and I don't think I'm even really making any sense. So the fact that anyone watches these means so much to me. I really love you guys a lot and I appreciate it, and I really enjoy the comments below. All right, I'll talk to you next time.